Hello, I'm Jane Macnaughton. I'm Director of the Institute for Medical Humanities here at Durham University. The Institute uses arts and humanities engaged with social science to understand better health and well-being. We also focus on conditions that may be considered hidden for some reason, whether that means that they are people who are marginalised in society, whether they be stigmatised, whether the conditions are things that are difficult to speak about, whether they're difficult to understand. At the Institute for Medical Humanities, we've long advocated an engaged approach to research. That means that we put those who have experience of the condition we're interested in at the centre of our research, not just as subjects of the research, but as expert collaborators. The power of this research approach has been shown over the last year during the course of the pandemic in the case of long COVID. That's a condition which has actually been created by those that have been suffering from it. People with long COVID have gone out there, have found each other online, have written about their condition, have researched it and created this condition. That really demonstrates the importance of basing this research around real experience. In this short presentation, we're going to showcase 3 examples of our research. One piece of research that's just finished, one that's ongoing at the moment, and one that's just getting going. And I think together they demonstrate the power of this research, the power of engaging with people with real experience of the condition to ask the right questions in order to provide answers that will make a real difference to people who suffer from these problems. The Wellcome Trust funded Life of Breath project, which we carried out here in Durham in conjunction with colleagues from Bristol University, explored the experience of living with chronic breathlessness. In the course of that project, we worked very closely with people who got together in so-called Breathe Easy support groups supported by the British Lung Foundation. And during the course of the project, we developed an exhibition which we held here in Durham. And for that exhibition, we created some film material where people with the problem of chronic breathlessness were able to explain the nature of their condition. And here's a clip coming up. The film is called Still Breathing.
I don't think of myself as a poorly person. I think of myself as somebody who did cartwheels across beaches in golden sun.
I enjoyed dancing. Bopping then and jiving was a big part of my life.
I used to be a kind of clarinet playing, singing, swimming, dancing, drum playing. I used to swim about a mile a week, go to the gym 4 times a week, and I really struggle to do things now.
While working with people with chronic breathlessness, we discovered that the uptake of the main treatment for this delivered by the NHS, which is called Pulmonary Rehabilitation, was not great. And we wondered about this and why this was the case. And our medical humanities approach to this began to understand that there were difficulties of the language of this treatment. People objected to the notion of being called rehabilitation. People with chronic breathlessness living in the Northeast weren't used to the gym culture within which this treatment was being delivered. And thirdly, the gym-like activities that were undertaken did not take into account the whole body approach and the very important issue about people starting to engage with their bodies again with this. So we proposed that dance might be a good solution to this. It's more fun. It engages you with a group. It helps you to reconnect with your body. We organised dance classes for people with breathlessness in our Breathe Easy colleagues groups, very much directed by what they wanted out of it. And here's a clip to show you what some of that work was like.
And into our star. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7, and change. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and into our lines. And go up. And peel off. And back to our original places.
We also discovered during the course of working with people that they found it quite difficult to talk about their breathlessness. That when they got together in the Breathe Easy groups, they found that they weren't talking about their breathlessness, they were talking about other things, peripheral to the problem. The only time they really talked about their breathlessness was to doctors and nurses in clinics. During that conversation, they were really only using clinical language that would enable them to express what the doctors and nurses would understand. What we did during the time of the project is we had a Northeast poet whose name was Christy Ducker, and she worked with some of our Breathe Easy colleagues, particularly creating poetry that would enable them to express some of this experience. Now, I'd really like to read you a poem that was written by one of the Breathe Easy group, whose name is Jill Gladstone. And the poem is called A Chance, and I'll read it to you. Grasp with gratitude this chance to speak. To say what? Can I do it? Do I have the courage? Do I have the language? We have the thoughts, mostly hidden, but words denied, or rather not asked for over the millennia. Thoughts fly, words flood. Whose language do we use? Who can share? So, despite the challenges of the last year, when we've all come across the problems of acute and chronic illness, perhaps this approach, which really takes into account and understands the experiences of people who are suffering chronic illness, might actually enable us to start to move forward and perhaps make a difference and change lives.
I'm Katharine Cheston, and I'm a PhD researcher at the Insititute. My research focuses on health conditions which cause physical symptoms, but which medical science can't yet fully explain. I'm particularly interested in how women with these conditions are shamed and stigmatized as a result of their illnesses, and I'm studying expressions of these experiences in published memoirs as well as in interviews. This research is the result of over a decade of sustained engagement with experts by experience. I've worked with many different organisations, from local support groups to national charities to international grassroots activism. I've witnessed firsthand the positive impact that the voices of experience can have on healthcare policy and on public opinion, for example. I've also witnessed what happens when academics and clinicians do not engage with the communities that they're studying. I've seen the consequences this has for these communities who can feel shut out of discussions about their own suffering, and I've heard the distress that this can cause. At the heart of my own research, then, is the acknowledgement that people with experiences of illness should be at the centre of research into their own conditions. To this end, I work closely with my project advisory group, composed of 8 women with lived experience of the complex conditions that I'm studying. We meet regularly and have open and productive discussions. I feel immensely privileged to hear their expertise and insights, which continue to shape my project. One key way that my advisory group has had a positive impact on my research is in the language that I use to describe the health conditions that I'm studying. Diagnostic labels can have significant consequences for those who live with them, as writer Julie Ray-Meyer makes clear in her memoir Through the Shadowlands. All the diagnosis seemed to add, she writes, was a stain of stigma, as if the name provided a window into my soul and displayed some moral failing within me. Ray-Meyer's experience shows that the language that we use to describe an illness can have real consequences. At the start of my project, I found that the conditions that I'm studying were described in the clinical literature as, for example, medically unexplained symptoms or persistent physical symptoms. However, I now know that many people who live with these complex conditions can find these labels distressing or even stigmatizing. My advisory group taught me to move away from clinical terminology and instead to adopt more descriptive labels such as complex and poorly understood medical conditions. This language, I found, is not only more respectful, but it's also encouraged more engagement in my research. For example, I recently published a survey which received hundreds of responses and an overwhelmingly positive feedback from social media. Jill's question, whose language do we use, goes, I believe, right to the heart of the ethics of academic research. But what seems evident is that using the language of lived experience, and not the language of the academic or of the clinician, can have real potential for positive change.
I'm Ariel Swyer, and I recently began a PhD at the Insititute. My work follows on from the Hearing the Voice project, and I am focusing on non-clinical voice hearers, or individuals who hear voices outside of the context of illness. These are people who hear voices regularly, but don't meet the criteria for any kind of disorder. Their experiences vary quite widely. The voices may be kind, irritating, helpful, mundane. Some people hear just one voice, some may hear lots of different voices. They may hold spiritual significance. For many, these voices are a meaningful aspect of life and don't generally cause too much distress or interference. I have just begun a project that looks at the ways in which voice hearing interacts with other aspects of people's lives, such as their spiritual beliefs and their relationships with their communities. As a person who does not hear voices, I am acutely aware of the need to put voice hearers themselves at the heart of my work. This is not only an ethical imperative, but essential for generating new knowledge. For instance, often the accounts that voice hearers give of their experiences defy the clinical categories that are traditionally used to understand them. Taking this resistance to categorization seriously can allow for new ways of conceptualizing voice hearing to emerge and open up new lines of inquiry. Like Katharine Cheston, my fellow PhD student at the Institute, I plan to set up a steering committee of voice hearing experts by experience who I will consult regularly and actively involve in my research. I'm still at the beginning of my PhD, and I'm very much still working to understand my relationship with voice hearing as a non-voice hearing researcher. But I do know that it is crucial to listen, to hold space for the complexity and ambiguity of human experience, and to make sure that in my work, voice hearers can speak for themselves. So if you'd like to learn more about this, or follow the development of the project, or chat with me about this, feel free to get in touch. Thank you for listening.